Hello students, welcome to Darasa Online. My name is Idrisa Msuya. I'm here to give you a revision lesson in History Paper 2. Our topic of today is the rise of dictatorship government in Germany, Italy, and Japan. We saw about the causes for the rise of dictatorship in Italy and Germany. And today we are going to look at the rise of dictatorship in Japan and impact of the rise of dictatorship government on world history. My dear students, our objective of our lesson of today is one, analyzing the factors leading to the rise of Japanese dictatorship, and the second, explaining the social, political, and economic impact of the rise of dictatorship government in Germany. My dear students, at the end of our lesson of today, I'm expecting that you'll be able to attempt these two questions. The first question is analyze factor leading to the rise of Japanese dictatorship, and the second question is explain the social, political, and economic impact of the dictatorship government in Germany. My dear students, let's now go to the rise of dictatorship government in Japan. Let's look at Japan. Japan is a country which is found in Asia. It is found in Asia. And today, as we speak, Japan is one of the richest countries in the world. In fact, Japan is the third largest economy in the world after United States of America and China. So Japanese development can be traced from 1886, when they introduced a constitution which was called the Meiji Constitution which was introduced by Meiji. In fact, it's called the Meiji Restorations. And under this Meiji Constitution, a lot of new things were introduced, including the introduction of modernization to the Japanese people. The King of Japan introduced a lot of changes, including copying some of the development that he saw after he made a visit in Western Europe, particularly in Britain and France. So Japan started her modernization starting from this year. They even advanced and introduced, introduced the industrialization. During the First World War, just like United States, Japan did not fight full during the First World War. In fact, she was not very much affected by First World War, so she was using First World War to supply things to other countries and so on. So Japan, as I've said, after First World War, they also adopted democracy, just like many other countries in Europe. They adopted democracy, which, as we're going to see later, it failed. This is the way we can explain briefly about Japanese dictatorship, my dear students. As you can see, military dictatorship in Japan, this is Hideki Tojo, the one who ruled Japan from 1941 to 1945. Later, remember, this one made alliance with Hitler and Mussolini to form the so-called the Axis and caused the outbreak of Second World War. Dictatorship came to Japan by, there was two people, Emperor Hirohito, who controlled in 1926. Military also was most trusted, the most trusted general, Hideki Tojo, as I said. Japan is a small country, as of course I said, but she wanted to become one of the imperial countries in the world. In 1931, Japan attacked Manchuria. Of course, I can't see this in detail, but in 1939, Japan joined Germany and Italy to the outbreak of First World War. Let's look at the causes for the rise of Japanese dictatorship. The first cause for the rise of Japanese dictatorship, it is Versailles Peace Treaty. Japan, just like we saw to Italy and Germany, Japan was disappointed. We say that Italy was dissatisfied, Germany humiliated, but Japan was disappointed by the Versailles Peace Treaty. Why were they disappointed? They were disappointed for many reasons, but the first reason why were they disappointed is they wanted to get the German rights. They wanted to be given some German colonies, particularly some German colonies of Shandong, but they were not given Shandong. Also, they wanted what is called the doctrine of racial equality. they saw that they were not treated as equal as equality. They were not treated like the way other European powers were treated. So the Japanese wanted the doctrine of racial equality to be treated as equal as some European powers. So this is what made, so Versailles Peace Treaty therefore was not so good to the Japanese, even though of course they were given some of what they wanted, but they were disappointed by these two things. One was to get German rights, particularly to get Shandong, but the second, it was to be treated equally, just like some other, some European powers, something which they never got. So it's because of this that other countries we have seen, also the Japanese were disappointed by Versailles Peace Treaty. And it's because of this that the military exploited that weakness and they started to go against the Versailles Peace Treaty, and some people supported the military because they were sure that the military is going to do this. But one thing which I said earlier, that they wanted this racial equality. So they were asking themselves some questions. Why are we not treated equal with other Europeans? Because they believe that maybe we have some economic development maybe very close to them. Why aren't they treating us equal? So one of the things which came to their mind is because maybe our military force is not as strong as theirs. So the military therefore believed that if the military take over the power of ruling Japan, they can be able to build up their forces to become very strong, and so Japan can be regarded equally by other nations of Europe. So it's because of that they realized that military, the Japanese military force can be the one to rule Japan, so that Japan can become very strong and respected by other nations, particularly other nations of Europe and the United States. As you can see, this picture shows the claim of the Japanese: give us what we deserve. They believe that what they were given is not exactly what they deserve. So they were asking to be given what they deserve. The Anglo-Japanese alliance drew Japan into First World War. That Japan joined the First World War after they made an agreement with the British. But Japan wanted to be seen as the world power to gain control over German possession in Asia and the Pacific. But they were not given those German rights in Asia and Pacific. So that's why they say, give us what we deserve. We deserve those German, we deserve the German colonies in Asia and Pacific, so we have to be given them. So that's why we said one of the things they had is that they wanted the implementation of the doctrine of racial equality, and they believe that the military can be able to make Japan a strong country and so respected by other nations. My dear students, let's now come to the second point, the collapse of democracy, which started in 1918 and ended in 1932. Democracy was established in Japan, but democracy collapsed, just like what we saw to other countries. The democracy of Japan was also facing a lot of problems. The leaders were chosen today and tomorrow, either they are assassinated or they resign, new leaders are chosen. So they were changing leaders every time now and then. And for that case later, the military started to take over the leadership of the country. So it's because of the collapse of that democracy which has been established, democracy which of course was very weak, that it paved the way to, it gave chances to the military to take over the power of ruling the country. The military generals, as later we are going to see, Hideki Tojo came to power as the Prime Minister of Japan instead of having the civilian prime ministers. Another point is the effect of First World War. Japan was affected by First World War, just like the way we saw other countries. But Japanese, First World War did not affect Japan the way it affected other countries like Italy and Germany. Why? Because I said earlier that Japanese participation in the First World War, it was not as intensive as other countries. In fact, she participated in the war like the Americans. At that time, they were producing and going on the activities and so on. But Japan, as I have said already, when the First World War was going on, especially at nearly the end of First World War, Japan was concentrating in production of some industrial commodities, and they faced the problem of shortage of food. And unfortunately, people were suffering. The price of food increased. And it was until very late that Japan has to import food from Vietnam. But it was too late. The government of Japan has become totally unpopular because people were no longer trusting their government. So that also gave chances to the military later to interfere into Japanese politics. Another point here is the hostility and paranoia toward the leftist political group and potential for xenophobia in Japan. There is this hostility and paranoia. Hostility and paranoia. Something happened in Japan in 1923, and that was the earthquake. There was earthquake which occurred in Japan. Earthquake occurred in Japan in 1923, and this earthquake was associated with fire, and it burnt the largest part of Tokyo. And some people blamed the Koreans and the Chinese, because these people were the communists. There were some Korean communists and the Chinese who were living in Japan. They were blamed. They were blamed that they're the one who caused the fire. And people didn't believe that fire was caused by the earthquake. So people were speaking in the street. It was then written by the newspapers and then believed by the military. And immediately there was the plan of attacking, there was the attacking over the Koreans and the Chinese. And they were blamed that these people were the communists. These people are the communists, they're just sabotaging the Japanese development and so on. But in fact, the fire was caused by the earthquake. But people have said, newspapers wrote, the army believed that everything was done by the Koreans and the Chinese. So it's because of that that people believe that their country is now in the great danger. So the only thing they can do is to support the military, because the civilian government has failed to stop the Koreans and the Chinese, and has failed to stop the communists. It's only the military which can stop the communists. As you can see, my dear students, this is the seat of Tokyo before the earthquake of 1923. It was called the Kanto earthquake. Before the Kanto earthquake, you can see these are the buildings. And these are the buildings also, as you can see, a very nice city. And this is the picture after the earthquake and the fire has destroyed the largest part of Tokyo. As you can see, the buildings have been burnt. Also, some of them have broken down, and so on. But here we have another good picture, as you can see. It has been grounded. There is almost nothing. Just see the buildings which remains. So all these blames were put to the Koreans and the Chinese, that they're the one who caused it. And it's because of this that people supported the army to take over the leadership of the country, because the army can stop the occurrence of things like this and so on. So my dear students, that is a point. Another point is the assassination of the Japanese civilian leaders. Assassination of the Japanese civilian leaders. Every leader who was chosen in Japan was either assassinated or he was wounded by the attempted assassinations. So by doing so, it made the civilian leaders to become leaders, to lead Japan. So everyone who was chosen to become the Prime Minister of Japan, he feared for his life, because the assassination attempt was always always targeted to those leaders. So it brought a lot of fear to the Japanese civilian leaders. So if the civilian leaders fear to lead, then who is going to lead? Obviously the military. So that gave chances to the military to come and rule Japan because of what was happening. Another point is the effect of great economic depression of 1930s. There was economic depression of 1930s, and that economic depression brought some effect to the Japanese people. Japan tried to fight against the depression by reducing the price of their goods and selling them cheaper outside. But remember, that was only the beginning. When depression was moving on, nearly to 1933, nearly to the peak, then the purchasing power of the people outside was decreasing. So it came that Japan was no longer selling the way she was selling, and the problem then started to go deeper to their economy. Unemployment increased, people's purchasing power decreased, and people wanted their life back, because they wanted at least purchasing power to return to normal, but the government could not do anything to help. So that also contributed to the, to the rise of dictatorship in Japan, because the military again was trusted that they can bring some changes. Another point here is the role played by Hideki Tojo. Hideki Tojo, as we've said, he played a very major role to the rise of dictatorship in Japan. This man, Hideki Tojo, as I said earlier, he was an army general. He was an army general and he came to power in 1941. But before coming to power, he already demonstrated and did a lot of things. And one of it was to lead the Japanese force to go to invade Manchuria in 1932. Also, he started that war by going to the Chinese, by going to that area, and he cut the Japanese railway and provoked the Chinese, and so start the war, and so on and so forth. So you can see that was a man who wanted to, always believed in expansion of Japan. He believed in expansionism of Japan. And for those people who wanted Japan to become one among the imperialist states, they supported leader like Hideki Tojo. So Hideki Tojo has played a very major role to the rise of Japanese dictatorship. My dear students, this is Hideki Tojo, and this is his historical background. Just born on December 30th, 1884 in Tokyo, attended Army Academy schooling and so on and so forth. But, most important, as I said, in 1940 he was appointed a war minister by Prime Minister Konoe. But in October 18th, 1941, Tojo was appointed Prime Minister of Japan, as you can see. And this is the man who authorized the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and forced the United States of America to join the Second World War. This is Hideki Tojo. My dear students, now we have come to the end of the first part of our discussion. When we come back, we'll talk about the impact of the rise of dictatorship government in the world. Welcome back. Now let's go to look at the impact of the rise of dictatorship government in the world. What is the impact of the rise of dictatorship government in the world? The first impact is the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War in 1936. The outbreak of the Spanish Civil War in 1936. What was this Spanish War all about? This is the war which started in 1936 between two groups. One was the group led by the socialist government, and it was fighting against the group which was led by dictator Franco Francisco. So these two groups were fighting in Spain, and this is said to be one of the very fierce civil war. But then, how do we link this with the impact of dictatorship government, the impact of the rise of dictatorship government in the world history? Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler, they came to this war to support Franco Francisco. Who was fighting against the socialists. But they came to support him not only because they wanted to fight against socialism, but also they wanted to test their newly discovered weapons. Remember, Hitler was preparing for the Second World War. He was preparing for a major war. So he wanted to test how good his weapon can function. He wanted to test the sophistications of his weapons. And so he found a war like this one, that it was a good area, a good place for him to test his weapons. So one of the impacts of the rise of the dictatorship government in the world history, it is the outbreak of Spanish Civil War. As you can see, this is the impact of the Spanish Civil War. This is the building which has been destroyed by the Italo-German air raid. That means the Italians and the German air raid of November 1936 to February 1937. As you can imagine, there were destruction. This is just a simple example of how Spain was destroyed, but you could see this in much of in most part of Madrid in Spain. Another point is it undermined democracy and democratization process. The process of democracy was undermined. Remember, dictatorship, as we have said, is the opposite of democracy. Dictatorship, it means there is no democracy. So it undermined democracy. It undermined democracy. First, if you start to look at Germany, Italy, and Japan themselves, there was no democracy. People did not have, people were not given people are not given the right, freedom of expression. There was no freedom of movement. There was no freedom of association. There was no freedom of media, expression, and so on because of dictatorship. So it undermined democracy and democratization process. That is what we can see. So not only that in those countries, but also you can look even to other countries beside Italy, Germany, and Japan. If you come to many countries in the world, they come to inherit the political systems of dictatorship, as we are going to see in the next point. But then, in short, we can say it undermined democracy and democratization process. And remind you, my dear students, when we say it undermined democracy and democratization, remember, we have got democracy and democratization means the process of introducing democracy to other countries. It was very much affected. Another point is it led to anti-Semitism and the persecutions of minority. Anti-Semitism and the persecutions of minority. Here, for instance, we speak about the Holocaust. The Holocaust. The Holocaust, here we are talking of the mass killing. Mass killing, like what happens to Jews. Mass killing of Jews. But also, some people also were killed in Italy. For instance, the gypsy were killed also in Italy. Also in Japan, as we have said, the Koreans and the Chinese, they were also killed in Korea. But that one did not end just in those countries. It also continued to other countries, during the Second World War. It occurred in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, in Hungary, in Russia, and so on and so forth. And this, as you can see, it led to the killing of the millions of people. Most affected people here were Jews. About 6 million Jews were killed in the gas chamber by Hitler because of those policies of dictatorship. These are the Jews, as you can see. They are put in the concentration camp waiting for the final solution, as what Hitler described. Waiting for final solutions. Just look at them. It's very sad. So this also explains the effects or the impact of these policies of Nazism, fascism, or even that Japanese dictatorship. Another point is the rise of extreme nationalism. There is the rise of extreme nationalism, not only the one which was practiced in those countries, but even today as we speak, there is extreme nationalism everywhere in the world. People are calling themselves the right wing, others neo-Nazis, others the nationalists. For instance, today in Germany, as you can see, there are some group of people who call themselves the neo-Nazis. And these people have come forward to oppose the immigration of people from other countries. And they, in fact, associate themselves with the Nazis. Also, have got others who are called the right wing. Others, they call themselves the nationalists, and so on. So today, today there are the Nazis and the fascists who jeopardize by calling themselves different names. But in fact, characteristically, they are the same. As you can see, this is the white nationalists who hold rally in Georgia, Drake Town in United States of America. And these people, as you can see, this is the swastika. This is the emblem which was used by the Nazis. This is the symbol which was used by the Nazis, and it's called a swastika. And they are carrying it. And in fact, they are also saluting like the Nazis, as you can see. So this shows that even today, as we speak, and this is very recent, my dear students. This is just 2018. See how that idea of Nazis, how that idea of dictatorship, the fascist ideas, how that idea lived till today. Some people today still embraces this kind of ideology, as you can see. So that is another impact of the dictatorship governments, in the world. Another point is the spread of policy of expansionism in the world. There is the spread of policy of expansionism. Expansionism, remember, it was typical practice by Benito Mussolini, Hideki Tojo, and even Adolf Hitler. They were expanding, and they were expanding for the creation of large territorial state. And this has been typical those days. As you can see, this is the Italian forces which was invading Ethiopia in 1935 as part and parcel of the Mussolini's mission of expanding the Italian territory by conquering some more territories in Africa. And the places that he saw, or that could be of interest to the Italians, it was Ethiopia. Remember, Ethiopia was not colonized, so Mussolini wanted to conquer Ethiopia, though later he failed in 1935. And of course, for the Japanese, as you can see, in their policy of expansionism, this is Japan, and in their policy of expansionism, they conquered some areas. For instance, this is Manchuria, and this is Korea. They also took Philippines, of course, this is during the Second World War. They also took Dutch East Indies. This is Indonesia, Malaysia, and Indochina. That means Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, even Burma. They took all these areas during the Second World War. And Manchuria, of course, they took it in 1932 when they fought against the Chinese. So you can see this is the example of the Japanese expansionism. Also, this is Papua New Guinea, as you can see. All these areas which are painted ready were taken by the Japanese. So it expressed the Japanese ambitions to expand their territories. Another impact of dictatorship governments in the world is the formation of aggressive alliance, and of course the outbreak of Second World War. The three dictators, Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo, they formed alliance which was called Rome, Tokyo, Berlin axis. Rome, Tokyo, Berlin axis. These have represented one of the very dangerous alliances ever to be formed in the world. And this alliance was responsible for the outbreak of Second World War. And of course, you can see for yourself how, what were the impact then produced by Second World War. The millions of people died during the Second World War. In fact, more than 60 million people died during the Second World War. That included combat soldiers and civilians. There were destruction of properties. So destruction was so large during the Second World War because of the formation of this aggressive alliance. This is the people who formed that alliance, as you can see in the picture. This is Adolf Hitler of Germany, and this is the map of Germany. As you can see, it has a swastika, the Nazi swastika, and this is Italy, and this is Benito Mussolini, Hideki Tojo of Japan, and these people formed, as I said, one of the very dangerous alliance, the alliance which, in fact, intended to conquer and rule the world. Another point here is the spread of dictatorship in the world. There was a spread of dictatorship governments in the world. That means dictatorship of similar type were established and spread all over the world. In fact, they copied the style which was used by Mussolini, Tojo, and Hitler to rule their countries. That kind of system has spread almost all over the world, as you can see. As you can see in some countries. For instance, in Africa, we used to have people like Mobutu, for instance. Even though he was not as bad as Hitler, but he was dictator, we have people like Jean Bendel Bokassa of Central African Republic. Also, we had people like Idi Amin of Uganda. Also, we have others like, we have others in other continents. For instance, there was Augusto Pinochet of Chile. Also, there were others like, Fulgencio Baptista Fulgencio Baptista of Cuba, who ruled Cuba until the Cuban Revolution of 1959. So, my dear students, as you can see, there were there was the rise of dictatorship governments which were similar to that one of Italy, Japan, and Germany. This is the picture of one of the very feared dictators in Indochina. This is the picture of a man called Pol Pot. And this man was responsible, in the killing of more than 1 million people when he was fighting to come to power in a country called Cambodia. And as you can see, these are the scars of the dead people, as you can see, which were stored somewhere, at least to, as a memory of what happened in the past during the leadership of this man, Pol Pot. This man ruled, this man led, a group called the Khmer Rouge, which fought to capture the state power of Cambodia and was supported by China. My dear students, now we have come to the end of our lesson of today. Let's now go through some questions. The questions that I gave it to you, now you can look at this question and see, do you have the answers to this question? After we have gone through, do you have the answers to this question? Now I'm sure you can answer this question very well. But let's just go through together to answer this question very quickly. As the question says, analyze the factors leading to the rise of Japanese dictatorship. Factor leading to the rise of Japanese dictatorship. The first point, as you can see here, it is the impact of First World War. Of course, we have said how First World War has contributed to the rise of Japanese dictatorship. The World War has affected the world. In fact, there were decrease of purchasing power of the people. There were other things like, like destruction of properties and so on. So the Japanese were not spared. They were also affected, just like some other people. So because of that effect of First World War, then as we said before, people started to find the kind of leader who can help them to overcome problems caused by the First World War. And they looked at the military leader as the option. So that is the first. The second is the assassination of the political leaders. Every civilian political leaders who was elected to become the leader of Japan, the Prime Minister of Japan, he was either assassinated or he was wounded by the attempted assassinations. So for that case, the civilian leaders, they started to fear for their lives. They started to fear for their lives to hold the political, to hold the political post. As a result, the political power was left to the military. And this also paved the way to the rise of dictatorship. Another thing is the fear of socialists. Of course, we have said it earlier about what we call the hostility and paranoia. Hostility and paranoia, whereby a fire broke out in Tokyo in 1923 as a result of the Kanto earthquake. But the blame was put to the socialists, and there was the beginning of assassination of the socialists. Socialists were killed, they were beaten, they were tortured because they were blamed for the fire in spite of the fact that fire was caused by the earthquake which broke out in that year. Of course, we even saw the picture how Tokyo was destroyed. And we said it was said by the people, and the newspapers wrote it, and the army believed it. And so there were systematic assassinations, killing, torturing of the socialists. And because of that fear, the army came forward and pretend that they are the only one who can be able to deal with the socialists. So that what happened in Tokyo would never happen again. So this is another very important point that you can use to answer this question. Another thing is the effect of Versailles Peace Treaty. Japan was disappointed by the Versailles Peace Treaty. Was disappointed because they wanted the implementation of the doctrine of racial equality. They were not treated as equal as other countries, particularly European countries. So they wanted to be treated as equal as other European countries, and they believed that the only way and the best way they can do to be treated equally, it is for them to become militarily powerful. So the only people who can do it so is the military. So if they choose the military leaders to lead the country, then the country is going to become very powerful, very powerful in terms of military, and so they can win the respect which they were not given during the Desert Peace Treaty. Another point is political instability. Political instability is just like what we saw to, in the previous, previous subtopics, that the political parties were not stable. No political party could command the majority. But in Japan, unfortunately, the political systems of Japan was very highly controlled by one company which is called the Zaibatsu. Zaibatsu company, this was the group of company which used to have more than the 75% of all Japanese manufacturing companies. And this company, this company was the one to determine who is to become the Prime Minister of Japan. So the Japanese politics, therefore, it was surrounded with corruption. And this company used to choose who is to become the leader of Japan. And because of that, then people became tired of this kind of system as long as they could not exercise their democracy at 100%. So for that case, the army intervened trying to change the situation. So that is another thing, political instability. Also, we have the Great Economic Depression. The depression also has contributed to the collapse of democratic system in Japan, leading to the rise of the Japanese dictatorship. Economic depression has made the life of Japanese people very difficult. As we have said, there was increasing unemployment, there was decreasing purchasing power, and when people complained to the government in power could not do anything. But the army was believed that it's going to do something. As we have said, the army was very much embarking on expansionism, like what we said has done, like what we said was done by Hideki Tojo when he was expanding to go to as far as Manchuria. So people believe that the army can bring the real changes that they wanted. So that is another point. The last point is the role played by Hideki Tojo. Hideki Tojo has played a very special role to the rise of dictatorship in Japan. Earlier we said civilian leaders were either assassinated or were wounded through assassination attempt. But the question is, who was doing it so? People were pointing to the army, that probably the army was the architect of political assassinations. So it kept on happening until 1941, when Hideki Tojo was appointed by King Hirohito to become the new Prime Minister of Japan. But there were a lot of incidences which occurred before this man became the Prime Minister of Japan. My dear students, that is the question number one, and now you know the answers to this question. Let's now move to another question. Question number two, explain the social, political, and economic impact of the rise of the dictatorship government in Yemen. This question, of course, is simple, as we have already discussed. The first is Spanish Civil War. We discussed it because the Germans wanted to go to Spain Civil War, especially to Spanish Civil War, which was between the socialists and the dictator Franco Francisco, who wanted to overthrow the socialists. And he was supported by Adolf Hitler, of course, and Benito Mussolini. But most important, Hitler wanted to test his newly discovered weapon before he go to the to his major campaign of trying to conquer the other European countries. So the first impact is the outbreak of Spanish Civil War. This civil war would have never broken if it wasn't support from Hitler and Mussolini. Another point is aggressive alliance and outbreak of Second World War. There was aggressive alliance between Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo, the one we called, the one which was called the Rome-Tokyo-Berlin Axis. So the Axis powers, they joined together, and they, and the alliance contributed to the outbreak of Second World War in 1939. But it started with the invention of Czechoslovakia, Poland, France, Belgium, and other countries in Europe. Another point here is the spread of dictatorship in the world. There were spread of dictatorship of similar fashion in different parts of the world. For instance, we have in South Africa, there was the spread of what we call the beginning of what we call apartheid policy. Apartheid policy was established officially in 1945 by Dr. Malan. But ask yourself, where did Dr. Malan got the idea of establishing this apartheid? Because if you look at apartheid, characteristically, it looks very much like Nazism of Germany. In fact, Dr. Malan got the idea from the Nazism of Germany, and it was instituted in 1945 as separation of people according to their color. So the Africans were treated the way the Germans were treating the minority in Germany. So this is another thing. But also, it did not just end there. You can also see there were some other different kind of systems which were practiced all over the world, which are similar to what was practiced by Adolf Hitler in Germany. Another point is expansionism. Expansionism also is one of the it's one of the impact of the rise of dictatorship governments in Japan. Expansionism. They expanded, of course, to form, they expanded to for the aim of increasing their living space, as we have said. But this was also copied by some other nations, by other countries in the world, trying to expand and so on and so forth. Also, another thing, it undermined democracy. We discussed it already, and also anti-Semitism and the persecution of the minority. In this, of course, you know the way Jews were killed in the gas chamber. More than 6 million Jews were killed in the gas chamber, of course, plus the Gypsy. Gypsy also were the people who suffered. So in short, we can say the minorities suffered in countries like Germany. Of course, Hitler came with, we said he was using the theory of social Darwinism, survival for the fittest. That means people who were not pure and genuine would have to perish, and so on and so forth. So, my dear students, these are the answers to this question. Explain the social, political, and economic impact of the rise of dictatorship government. Sorry, it was supposed to be in German, Italy, and Japan. It might include all. So this is what we can say regarding this question, my dear students. Now we have come to the end of our lesson of today, and it is my hope that you have enjoyed the lesson and you have been able to follow the questions that I gave you. And now you can answer not only these questions, but also questions which are related to this topic. Next time we meet, we are going to look at another party, which is the internal and foreign policy of the dictatorship government of Italy, Japan, and Germany. My dear students, thank you and goodbye. Let's meet next time.